In Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
Welcome to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Questions are welcome by calling 855-237-2346. That's 855-237-2346. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us on this Tuesday evening, December 19th, just a few days away from Christmas. I'm joined tonight by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Good to be with you all tonight.
And as many of you know, Roxanne's a clinical psychologist, and I'm the parish priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church right here in Jacksonville, Florida. And if you're new to Live with the Louhs, one thing that you should know is that this is a show that merges both faith and psychology to really give you some practical principles that you can apply and grow in your own walk of faith. That's our dream. That's our desire for all of you. So thanks so much for being with us this evening. You know, we have a number of ways that you can stay connected to us all throughout the week. We're on our social media platforms. Friends, we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and on YouTube. In fact, all of our shows and all of our sermons are archived on the Louhs YouTube channel. So if you have not subscribed, you can do a great favor to all of us by simply subscribing to the Louhs YouTube channel. And that last name is spelled Louhs. And also, you can download or receive our daily inspirational messages by going to our website. And again, this is at thelouhs.com. Simply click on that subscribe button, and all you have to do is simply put in your email address, and every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, you'll receive that day's daily inspirational message. And I know, Roxanne, many people receive those messages and have written back how beneficial they are. And that's really
Absolutely. We want to give a shout out, too, to all of you who've written in. I mean, there's been so many emails, haven't been able to respond to all of them, but we just want to say thank you because we read each and every one of your feedbacks. And they've just been so encouraging and directed us in areas you want more of and areas you are wanting to hear about. So we're just thankful. Thank you for keeping us going.
Absolutely. And again, I just invite you, if you haven't or not receiving them, definitely go to our website, thelouhs.com, click on the subscribe button, and all you have to do is simply put in your email address. And every morning, in fact, tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., you'll receive our daily inspirational message. And as always, if you're looking for some last-minute Christmas gifts, one of the things that we would recommend is go to the Ancient Faith bookstore. There's so much material that's out there, guys, that's so helpful in your own walk of faith. Our book, Renewing You, is a book that has been at Ancient Faith. It's actually published through Ancient Faith. And the proceeds from this book, as many of you already know because you've purchased the book, but goes to the American Cancer Society in honor and in memory of our fathers. In fact, that was the impetus behind us writing this book. So if you're looking for a last-minute little stocking stuffer, go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com/renewing you. And if you're looking for that book, that would be, I think, very helpful, especially as we're coming into the new year. Check out Renewing You. As always, we'd love to hear from all of you during our conversation tonight, which is going to be a very interesting and very powerful conversation. You can do so by calling us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. Or feel free to email me during the live broadcast of our show by emailing me at ask, that's A-S-K, at ancientfaith.com. So friends, let's get started. You know, parenting, as we all know, and I know Roxanne and I are so blessed to have two children that are ages 16 and 14. But to be honest with you, although it's a great blessing, it's a gift, a true gift from God, it's also very difficult. It's challenging. I think that one of the greatest things that we can do, obviously, is to raise our children in the way in which our Lord desires for us to do so. But let's not make a mistake. Parenting is so hard. And for many of us, we're trying to manage all these different aspects of our life. We're managing what I call ourselves sometimes being the Uber driver. We're just kind of driving our children from one event to one practice to one performance. to taking care of their, helping them with their homework or guiding them on that, dealing with the social media pressures that also come along with that, and also just trying to manage, what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. But what about us? What about having that peace that we all yearn for as parents in guiding in our children? How can we talk about, embracing the Prince of Peace at this Christmas season when for many of us as parents, it could be a season that's really filled with a great deal of chaos? And so tonight we thought we'd dedicate a show to acquiring what we're calling acquiring the spirit of peace as parents. And we've invited a dear friend of ours, Dr. Sofie Azmy, to be with us this evening. And let me tell you a little bit about her, because I think her bio is so important and so powerful, and I think that she'll be such a beneficial host and a guest on our show. But let me tell you a little bit about her. She's a licensed clinical psychologist who currently works in private practice. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology from Wheaton College. She enjoys offering her expertise in integrating faith into the therapeutic process to facilitate healing and growth. She has taught undergraduate and graduate psychology and counseling courses and provided clinical supervision. She has a passion for serving and training. She enjoys leading workshops and speaking on a variety of mental health and parenting topics. That's why we wanted her on the show tonight, in addition to her active service in her church community. She, too, is married to a priest, Father Samuel, and together enjoying the adventure of parenting their 3 daughters. So, Dr. Sofie, welcome to Live with the Louhs.
Thank you so much for having me, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you here with us as well. So let's just kind of really start from the very beginning. And let's just why is this topic about the spirit of peace in the context of parenting so important?
Well, when I think of that phrase, acquiring the spirit of peace, there's a quote that comes to mind, and it's a popular quote. It's a quote by Saint Seraphim of Sarov that says, "Acquire the spirit of peace, and 1,000 souls around you will be saved." I'm really drawn to that quote, and I find it inspiring. And while as a parent, I don't necessarily, I'm not aiming to save 1,000 souls, but I'm definitely interested in the souls of the ones that are entrusted to me, who happen to be in my household. So if acquiring the spirit of peace can aid in saving the souls of my own children, then I think it's not just wonderful, but also wise to reflect on how we as parents can acquire that spirit of peace in our homes. And, when we're talking about the spirit of peace, we're ultimately talking about the Holy Spirit, right? And the peace that is the fruit of the Holy Spirit. We're also called to be peacemakers, right? We're called to be peacemakers by Christ himself. Christ said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." And when we think of peacemakers, who are they? They're the ones that have the peace of God or the Holy Spirit within them, but then they're able to spread that peace to those around them. And so it's part of our identity, actually, as children of God, right? To be peacemakers, to be spreading peace. And so it's one of our calls as parents, right? Is to acquire that peace, to seek that inner peace, and to be able to spread that peace in our homes, with our children.
I love, how the first parts of the Divine Liturgy says that for the peace from above and the salvation of our souls, having this kind of heavenly or godly peace, and how we're praying that from the very beginning. And so many of the services in the Orthodox Church have that, begin with those initially three litanies, or petitions, I should say, that are all about peace. And I know, Roxanne, you were going to talk about just this notion of having this heavenly peace.
Well, I think it's interesting because, as you come to the table, you think about peace. I think so much of the time we come into marriage with different levels of valuing that peace or even being used to peace. You have those who, listen, they even listen to certain types of music because they value tranquility, they value peace, and you can see it in every expression in the way that they sort of move through life. And then you have other people whose music choice might be very, very different, loud, and, maybe they grew up in a home that was used to a lot of external chaos. And, I think it's interesting that I sometimes see a very big difference in terms of the value people even place as they come into marriage on having peace. And they don't necessarily recognize when peace has been lost, when there is that shift in the, emotional climate that we exist. And, it's not even necessarily noticed because perhaps in their, upbringing, it was a very chaotic or stressful, lots going on, overstimulated environment. And so, how do you sort of merge that in terms of working with parents who may come from different backgrounds, different, environments that they adapted to, and now the value of peace is something that almost has to be taught or merged or, made aware of in people who just may not have that same value or may not have that same awareness.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. When we look at our culture today, there's so much going on that is so counter peace. There's so much that is there that is grabbing our attention in a way that disrupts peace. Right. And so you're right. There are people who think that's the norm because that's the environment, that's the culture that they grew up in. But the reality is, I think there's a sense of earning, that we do need peace. Something is missing when we don't have that peace. And so we know that peace, like we said, it's a fruit of the Spirit. And so it's not something that we can just make up, right? And just create on our own. It's something that needs to be, it's a gift really of the Holy Spirit. And it's, so when you're saying, how do we merge that? If one person is able to model that, right, is able to show the difference when one is living in peace, that becomes appealing. Again, it becomes like, hey, I want some of that, right? And so modeling in our homes the value of peace and choosing actions that align with that. And that includes, like you were saying, the choices of the music that we listen to, right? The choices of the media that we expose ourselves to, our actions, our the way we speak to one another, the tone, the sense of urgency and hurry, or versus the calmness that we bring to our daily lives. So it's in the everyday choices that we make that we're able to model that. And I believe that part of that modeling is what's going to attract those that are in our household to like, oh, I want more of that.
Absolutely. And so, moving into sort of how we acquire this spirit of peace, it sounds like, some of it may be an uphill climb for people whose dispositions may work against that, even like, the type A person who's very time urgent, has this sort of strong sense of, urgency, or the task over person who's, letting the problem to be solved become more important than the person who's standing right in front of them. And, I think that sometimes we battle, maybe we could talk a little bit about that, but, we may battle and have to have some of our own self-awareness of, hey, what am I bringing to the table from a dispositional standpoint that could be making this harder for me to connect to the peace that the Holy Spirit yearns for us to have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're, absolutely right when it comes to the fact that we do need awareness, in order for us to even reflect on that. Now, parenting is very humbling. Like Father Nicholas was saying in the intro, it's a very difficult endeavor. It's not something that by any means, one can say they're an expert at it. I don't think I've ever met a parent who claims they're an expert on parenting. Right. And so it's not something that we can do on our own. It's something that we do need God's help with. And one of the verses that I really like when it comes to that, acquiring peace is a verse that's found in Isaiah 26. It says, you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. And so if you look at that verse, first of all, it acknowledges that perfect, peace comes from God, right? So you will keep him in perfect peace. But then the second part of it, where it says, whose mind is stayed on you, is implied in that we do have an ability to reflect on where is our mind stayed on, right? And so that's
or
the
how
part of
quickly
that
it
awareness.
goes away from that, right?
Exactly.
Like, the second our child disrespects us and we take it personally,
Yes.
I don't know that our mind stays on him in that moment, right?
No.
It quickly
So,
shifts.
Exactly. And so where is our mind in those situations? And so part of that are, our ability to notice, where are my thoughts? Where are my feelings? Where am I, again, tangled up in all these like stories of how my child may have come across as being disrespectful or unappreciative or irresponsible, or whatever it may be, right? Or am I able to shift back and set my mind on God, right? And so there's implied again in that verse is that we have that ability first to notice, right? And then to choose where to keep our mind set. And so part of that is, as parents who are striving to acquire that spirit of peace, is to learn skills to be able to push some sort of a reset button. I like to call it as a reset button. And that can look, for different people, it can look differently, but, it could be even just taking a moment to take a deep breath, right? It could be, taking a moment to say the Jesus prayer, some way to ground yourself or anchor yourself. And to me, that's sort of like a version of pushing a reset button to kind of reset the focus back on God, because then we're able to go to that third part, which is of that verse where it says, because he trusts in you. When we reshift or refocus to God, then we're able to say, okay, I'm not in control of, how my kids react or behaving or any of that. I'm in control of myself. And so I need to get recentered, right? And trust God in helping me choose what I need to be doing in this moment that will help teach my kids something, or help me to model something, or help me to guide, my kids in whatever it is that they're struggling with. And so that's a way to, again, be able to have that awareness, right? To see, like, where am I?
Absolutely.
And what do I need to do?
And having that self-awareness, I think is what helps us create a boundary, right? Where something can be happening on the outside of us, but it is not destroying what's on the inside of us. We joke in our house, I'll make sort of this motion with my hands around me. I'll say force field. It's almost like, nothing can come in. And, I may be joking with whatever it is that's coming on the outside.
It's more often directed towards me.
It's mostly directed toward my husband. But, it's sort of in many ways, it's a lighthearted way of sort of like, this is where I stop and you begin, and whatever's happening on the outside, and I don't know if you do this as a mother too, Dr. Sofie, but there's a moment where if something is happening with my child in a lot of emotion, there's a step back within me where I stop that emotion from coming on the inside of me to the point where I may lose my focus or take something personal or become very reactive to it. Because if I start to feel it, if I start to let in that emotion, it comes past the force field, then I am no longer really able to let them borrow my calm or borrow my problem solving or borrow my perspective. And I feel like so often when kids are really reactive, what they need to do is borrow our reasoning, our perspective taking. We need to borrow our grounding. And so I think in that self-awareness sort of helps us uphold the boundaries where, just because something's happening on the outside of us doesn't mean that it has to come on the inside. The child can be not okay and I can stay okay. And I'm probably going to be in a better, space to be able to actually help them than if I start to feel what they feel. And that, I don't think that's easy. I would say that that's something probably over 15 years I've sort of had to learn, because, as a parent, you feel very strongly. If your child is hurt and pain, you start to feel it. But then, I don't know if you feel that way, Dr. Sofie, but I feel like that compromises our judgment or ability to lead or guide or give perspective in situations where they really need it.
Yeah. So, we have 3 children of our own. And so, yes, absolutely can relate to what you're saying. And It takes practice. It takes a lot of awareness. And I love what you said, that our kids need to sometimes they need to borrow our calm. And if we're not able to recenter, refocus, regain our peace, then we're actually not helping them. And we're letting, a lot of times even in our everyday language, when we say things like, well, he made me so angry. Well, so what are we saying? Am I saying this person has power, their emotions have power over me, right? And so that's where I'm letting their emotions come in, and I'm getting tangled up in their emotions instead of noticing the anger, noticing the emotion, and then as an observer, right? And then I'm able to come from that grounded place and help my child manage their emotions. One of the statements that I heard many, many years ago, and I love, quoting it all the time, is emotions are indicators. They're not dictators. Emotions just tell us they're a signal, right? But they don't dictate what we do. And it's really wonderful for us to be able to teach that to our kids, but also to remind ourselves of that. Just because my child is anxious right now about something, I may notice my own anxiety coming up as I'm watching my child struggle with something, but my anxiety, that emotion, doesn't dictate what I do, right? It just tells me, okay, something's up. I need to be strong right now. I need to be that calming presence for my child. And that helps me do that, which is a lot more effective than getting caught up in the emotion and letting the emotion kind of dictate what we do.
Yeah, I think it's a powerful word that you use too, that the observer, to be an observer. I don't think that's, so natural for people to be an observer when something's happening, to someone they love. They want to, jump in or affect change with, or control outcome of, or, calm the situation, remove the emotion. And I think that the ability to be an observer in those moments, while be it not easy, is so powerful. The result of that is powerful because, reflections happen, connections happen, and I think they return to calm that much quicker when we don't add, fuel or any extra emotion to the situation that's happening on the outside of us.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I just want to give an announcement, reminder to our listeners tonight that you're more than welcome to join this conversation. If you're a parent or someone that's struggling at this time, just with trying to find that peace as a parent, and doing as what Dr. Sofie was talking about, this acquiring of the spirit of peace, feel free to call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also email me a question during the live broadcast of our show by emailing me at ask, that's ASK, at ancientfaith.com. As you both were talking, I couldn't help but think that, so often we tend to think of the peace being between a parent and a child, but oftentimes what's in many ways stealing our peace, which ends up cascading into our relationship with our children, are things that are outside of the home. There are things that we struggle with maybe at work, or just the stresses that come along with what we're dealing with on a personal level. Dr. Sofie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, for the listeners that are tuning in this evening, how important is it to be purposeful in that self-awareness of not only our relationship with our children and making sure that we hold on to that peace on ourselves, and as a result, teach them what that looks like, but also maintaining our peace in the turbulence that we're seeing around us. It's the stressful times that tend to come about.
Yeah. As you're asking that question, Father Nicholas, so I got this image. You remember how when kids are younger, and when they, like, let's say a toddler falls down, the first thing they do is they look up at their parents' face to see how they react. And then they base, if mom looks calm, then it's no big deal, right? But if mom looks shocked, then this must be horrible, right? And they start crying.
So true.
And so to me, that's a really good reminder. What am I modeling as I'm responding to the news around me, to the circumstances that are outside of our home? to the stories that we might be hearing, because our kids are watching that, right? They're watching our response, our reaction, and they're a lot of times learning how to respond based on how we're responding.
Absolutely.
And so,
I love that. Even when you forget something at home, how do we react to that? Because chances are they're going to become super reactive the next time they do that as well, if it becomes, an all or nothing, response that we have. And so I love what you're bringing up, because that's also another source of self-awareness. How am I handling my own stress? How am I handling the things that I'm seeing, in the news? What is it doing within me, and how does that bleed into my family? And how does that actually, what does that teach my children who are learning from me in those moments?
Yeah.
Dr. Sofie, I just to kind of continue on this kind of path about with our children's, how do we reflect on why our children are misbehaving? When we see our children misbehaving, how do we deal with that? How do we reflect on that?
Yeah. So again, so it seems like, as you notice, like the theme of what we're talking about so far when it comes to peace, we're talking about this concept of reflection and awareness, right? And so when our kids misbehave, we need to also use that same stance of reflecting. So it's the stance of, I wonder why my child is acting this way. I wonder why my child did not finish her homework. I'm wondering why. So it becomes more of a curious stance. And that way it helps us to reflect on what is going on. One of the I'm sure maybe you've heard it before, but it's like, I don't know who came up with it, but not me. I just heard it, so I keep repeating it, which is, get curious, not furious. And so this idea of, again, wanting to have a curious stance of like, why is my child, yelling? Instead of getting furious, trying to understand. And the other, common acronym that's often used in parent is this HALT acronym, HALT, halt before you respond to your child. And so the HALT is maybe part of the answer of why they're acting that way. So H stands for they're hungry. A is maybe they're angry at something. L means, it may be lonely, and the T is tired. So HALT, HALT. Right. And so then I would ask myself, because maybe they're just, they're short-tempered because they haven't eaten for, 5 hours. And so they're hungry, right? Or maybe something happened at school that angered them. Or maybe their friend, now they're no longer friends. And so they're feeling lonely, or they're tired. They didn't sleep well the night before. And so again, part of that is understanding the why behind why they're misbehaving, instead of jumping to a conclusion of, they're being lazy.
So important.
Right.
But what's going on in their world? I feel like that's what you're saying is what is going on in their world? Because I feel like so often with the curious, stance where parents sometimes go is judgment. They're doing that because they're disrespectful. They're doing that because they're lazy. They're doing that because they don't care. They're doing that because they don't value what I value, And so I feel like sometimes that narrative goes south very quickly. And the judgment then breeds the intensity, the escalation, the emotion, the fire of how we then respond to it, which totally misses the mark if they are upset about something that has already happened in their day that we have no awareness of, that now we are creating an intensity and fire around something totally unrelated. And now the child is, hopeless, helpless, overwhelmed, shut down. Right. And so I think that the beauty of that question is, what is going on in their world? And let's not answer the curious stance with judgment. Let's not take their behavior personally. And I do think so often, as parents, we do struggle with or something we stand for when, so often there's just so many other things going on in their world that I think they don't always talk about either. I think it's important to sort of assume that you don't know because they don't always put words to their experiences.
Right. And the minute we label their behavior in a negative way, like you said, we lose sight of what's really happening. And then so the focus becomes on us right? As parents, like, how dare they talk to me like this? Or,
Correct.
you know, they're so, and of course that leads to lack of peace. And when we're operating from a lack of peace, then again, we're not being very effective.
And so what is the response? If this is the internal response of the curiosity and I wonder what's going on in their world and let's have compassion for those things, what should be the words that then follow that curious, reflective, you know, awareness response? What are the words that should then follow in response to the misbehavior?
Well, once we understand, you know, what's happening in their world, what is going on, then we're able to address that, right? So it doesn't become about us. And so it becomes about their struggle and what they're going through, right? And so part of that then is helping them understand that we understand where they're coming from, right? So it's helping them feel that they're seen, that they're being heard. And then once we're able to connect, then we're able to teach. Okay, so if it's, for example, this is the 5th time they haven't finished their homework, you know, and so maybe it's because they're finding this subject matter or whatever it is that they're covering right now very difficult for them, and they're embarrassed by it. And so it's not necessarily, you know, laziness or lack of responsibility, but maybe it's feeling of shame or feeling embarrassed about the fact that they feel they aren't smart enough. And so then we're able to, once we get to the core of what's going on, then we're able to address that. Okay, well, what are some tools that we could use to help? Let's focus more on problem solving as opposed to, again, judging the child.
Yeah, the problem solving. And I love that that's followed by connection, because it's really hard to problem solve with anyone that you're not connected to. If your child feels on an opposite side of the fence from you, you know, they certainly aren't going to walk down the problem solving because they're not on common ground with us, right? And so I love that focus on connection first. And sometimes just entering that emotional space sometimes just opens up a whole conversation that has nothing to do with what they didn't do or what they did wrong. And you just start to see their vulnerability in really beautiful ways that they weren't able to talk about, you know. And so, I love that.
And part of that too is when we're connecting, we're able to calm the emotion and allow the thinking part of their brains to operate. Right? Because when their emotions are escalated, they're not thinking logically. And so we can't really problem solve at that point, right? So we need to first connect, because that calms the nervous system, that calms the emotion. And then it lets their thinking part of the brain come online, right? And so then we're able to actually problem solve and able to address what's really happening.
Yeah, it's like how we oftentimes say let's connect before we correct.
Correct.
I love what you're both sharing, and I have a question, but before I ask this question, I definitely want to remind our listeners tonight that if you would like to ask a question to Dr. Sofie about parenting, maybe you're struggling just in general with parenting, or struggling maybe today just to have this peace that we're talking about seems so foreign, so distant from where you are right now. Feel free to call us and speak with Dr. Sofie. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. Again, it's 1-855-237-2346, as well as you can email us during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. You know, Dr. Sofie, I can't help but think, we talked about this a few moments ago, but I really like to dig a little bit deeper into this topic of self-awareness and being aware of how we are, because we can't give what we don't have. In other words, if we talk about this desire to give or share with our children, and I would argue even our spouse, this level of peace. But if we don't have it, you know, we can't, it's hard obviously to give it because you don't have it. But ultimately, I think what's so often happening in people is this spiritual battle, the spiritual warfare that we oftentimes talk about, where we become so distracted with the ways of the world that we find ourselves in all these different main directions. And especially as parents, we're constantly trying to there's so much pressure just to simply be a parent, to have our children to, achieve these certain academic roles and goals in their lives, but also to raise, great children, which are things that we obviously want to be doing, godly children. But with that being said, though, how would you encourage a listener tonight to pause and have that self-awareness throughout their day? Because so much of our church and so much of the tradition of our faith is not only about, having that self-awareness when it comes to peace, but really just a self-awareness in general in our own walk of faith. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, when we talk about self-awareness, it's the term that comes to mind from an Orthodox perspective is this idea of watchfulness, right? This idea that we're awake, right? We're not just kind of going on autopilot. We're being watchful in our decision-making and the choices that we make. And so that is our ability to be able to grow in self-awareness and have that and practice that. And so part of that is when we are during the day, finding ways to pause and ask yourself, why am I acting like, let's say I get a phone call and then I get upset. Right? Okay, why did I just get upset? What was it about that phone call that ruffled some feathers, right? When, my spouse says something to me that, I'm like, I don't know if I like that. Why? And so again, having that curious stance with ourselves too, right? Like, why am I acting this way? Why am I feeling this way? And then being able again to observe. So it's that observant stance, like I'm watching it as if I'm watching a movie, and distancing myself from that, because then I'm able to decide, well, what do I do with that information instead of letting that story of what's happening be, again, the dictator, right? Telling me what to do or how to act or what I'm supposed to do. So finding ways during my day to just pause and reflect on whatever thoughts I'm having right now, right? Whatever feelings I'm having right now, to like take that observer kind of stance, that watchful stance, and to see like, what is this? Why is this coming up? And what do I do with it? And when I ask myself, what do I do with it? Then I need to be clear. Like if I value peace as, a value that I want to be able to live by, then what is an action that I could do that aligns with that, right? And so maybe right now that means I need to say a kind word, right? Because that aligns with the value of peace. I don't let the story, I don't let with the circumstances, I don't let those things tell me what to do, right? And part of that is, practicing these reset button types of moments throughout our day. So like I said, whether it's on a regular basis, trying to incorporate the Jesus prayer. One of the practices that I teach my clients is, and this comes from ACT, it's a skill that's called dropping anchor. And dropping anchor, you could do this basically anytime during the day, but it's basically it's a 3-step process where you're able to acknowledge. So that it's the acronym for dropping anchor is ACE, ACE. So A is you acknowledge whatever thoughts, emotions are coming up for you in that moment. And then the C is you connect with your body. So you do something with, whether it's taking a deep breath, whether it's stretching, whether it's saying the Jesus prayer. And then the E is is engaging your senses. So what am I seeing right now? What am I hearing right now? And what is that this is all about getting yourself back into the present moment. And so when we're talking about self-awareness, when we're talking about watchfulness, we are talking about ways to practice being in the present moment where we're not distracted by our past or worries about the future, right? And so this is just one example of one way to practice presence, being in the present.
And I think, to do any of this, there needs to be that value of peace. And, I think that it's so easy for so many, people, when they feel stressed or they feel angry or they feel upset by something, to want to stay there. They feel righteous and they're upset from work, or they feel, I need to be in this angry state. I want to stay in this angry state. I don't know that there's always this return, this intrinsic desire to return to peace, even when you know it's lost, even when you see and notice, I've lost it. I feel people struggle with the desire to want to get back peace. And so, I think that's something I would ask everyone to sort of also think about is, can I say that I truly value peace? Our faith, we're called to be peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And we're called to constantly seek the peace of the Holy Spirit. And I think our flesh really messes with us in these times, because the Spirit doesn't want to stay there, but sometimes our flesh does. And I think that's something we have to really be honest with ourselves, honest enough to say, am I choosing, to allow this to continue to stay here? Have I chosen to allow it? Because if that's the case, no tool is going to help us come back to a peace that we are not seeking.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, kind of in line with that, what would you say to folks who are asking, how do we really nurture emotional intelligence? I mean, that's a big topic, This emotional intelligence is a huge, huge topic. But maybe you could kind of, gloss over some of the big picture items on how we nurture emotional intelligence in our days, in our weeks, and in our lives.
Yeah, it is definitely a big topic. But to put it simply, I mean, what is emotional intelligence? A simple definition, if you will, would be, so it's our ability to manage our emotions, to be able to connect with others well. So there's two parts of it, being able to self-regulate and manage our own emotions well. And then because of that, we're able to connect with others well. And so implied in that, right, is awareness, what we've been talking about, right? That awareness of our emotions, our ability to feel other people's emotions, so empathy, and our ability to see how our actions, our behaviors, our decisions have an impact not just on us, but on others as well, right? And so in doing that, right, we can't teach something like we've been talking if we're not modeling it, right? So in self-regulating as parents, in modeling how we're managing our emotions. So when I say something like, I am really upset right now to my own kids, if I say, I'm really upset right now and I need some time to calm down so that I can think clearly about what I need to do, that's me trying to model, what do I do when I'm feeling upset, right? So we want to be able to find opportunities to model that to our own kids. When I make a mistake, how do I talk to myself when I make a mistake, in front of my kids, because they're watching and they're learning from that, right? I mean, I recall when they were younger and I'm, driving around town, if I make a wrong turn, I would try to, say things out loud to say, oh, oops, I made the wrong turn. I guess now I need to make a U-turn. I would say that stuff out loud and make it sound like it's no big, we all make mistakes, right? And then figure out a way to correct these mistakes. It's not the end of the world when we make a mistake. And so modeling that to our kids.
And how important is it, if we can capitalize on this for a moment, to actually name the feelings that we are actually having?
Absolutely.
Because so often parents, who are clearly upset, miserable, stressed, will say, I'm fine. And what does that communicate to kids? First of all, creates incredible anxiety because they're seeing something that they can't name. But let's talk about that for a moment. How easy it is for parents to say, I'm fine, when, part of emotional intelligence and being able to manage our emotions and regulate our emotions is first being able to name them, you know, and that's not a bad thing to say to your children, you know, what you actually feel, and may actually ease their anxiety because there's a little bit maybe of consistency from what they're feeling and what you're saying to them.
And there is power. There is power in naming our emotions, right? First, it helps our kids to be able to name their own emotions. Otherwise, you know, you see all these grown people now who can't identify what they're feeling, right? Because they've never seen that growing up, or they've never had an opportunity to learn how to do that, right? And so it's, as parents, we need to practice that and teach our kids on how to name their own emotions. And so when I'm upset, instead of just saying I'm fine, you're right, I would actually say, you know, I'm disappointed right now, or well, that was embarrassing, you know. So like talking about how I'm feeling. And when our kids are going through something, to help them name what they're going through helps them with their emotional intelligence, because then they have a name for it. And once you have a name for it, kind of discharges the power that emotion can have over you, because then it's not the emotion again that's in control, right? If you have a name for it, you're in control.
And I think in that, you know, parents have to sort of manage their own, you know, reactions to their kids having feelings. You know, sometimes I see a lot of parents who don't want to allow their kids to feel. There's no acceptable emotion other than, you know, peaceful, respectful, kind, you know, compassionate humans, but that's not life. You know, we have all kinds of emotions, some deep, some dark, some negative, some, you know, we're constantly, you know, vacillating through the wheel of emotions, right? And so I think sometimes parents are uncomfortable if kids are experiencing an emotion that isn't peaceful, or that isn't, they deem, you know, okay. And so I just, as a shout out to parents who are doing them, I think it's wonderful to allow kids to say no, you know, to choose, to be disappointed, to not like something. And I think that the collateral damage I see in kids who were not allowed to feel, or not allowed to have a bad mood, or not allowed to say how they feel, or they can't choose anything as adults, and they have no boundaries. And it's a real struggle for them to identify what they feel and what they need in relationships, and they don't have a boundary. And so, you know, for parents everywhere who struggle with their kids feeling anything that isn't, you know, perfect and wonderful and kind, you know, that's what they need to actually know themselves, and to be able to voice that later on, you know, in relationships.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually disempowering when kids aren't able to name their emotions. And so parents, it does take courage for some parents who may feel uncomfortable with emotions that may seem difficult. You know, parents don't like seeing their kids struggle, right? But it's actually empowering to help our kids learn that it's okay to have emotions. You know, I often say emotions are like the weather. You can't really control the weather, but then you decide like, okay, so it's rainy. What do I need to do about that?
And it may not be something we move on from so quickly, you know, and sometimes we name it, the expectations, we're ready to move on from it. Sometimes that sadness may not pass till the morning, and that's okay. We wake up refreshed, and everyone's in a better place. But we did have an email question that came in that I'm going to kind of summarize, because I think it relates to the next question we want to ask about really disciplining in peace. But, you know, the writer talks about her 14-year-old who's quite challenging and breaks boundaries often in different surroundings, and can be oppositional at times. And when you have a particular child, she says, who's doing the opposite to most of your instructions and enjoys stirring up trouble with their siblings, you know, what can you do? How can you react as a parent in a helpful way?
Yeah, that's difficult, right? When our kids are acting in a way that seems to be disruptive and maybe even harmful for themselves, right? If they're hurting themselves or they're hurting other family members. So the first thing, obviously, is to make sure that safety is addressed. And when we're trying to discipline, again, we want to be able to discipline from a place of peace. So what that means is we don't want to be reactive. We want to be able to respond to what is going on so that we're able to redirect our children. We're able to teach them instead of reacting to their behavior. And so, again, it starts with our own reflection on our inner state. We need to make sure that we're parenting from a calm place, right? And then often when kids are acting in ways that tend to be disruptive or, they're misbehaving, it's so easy for us as parents to focus on all that is going wrong and all the things that they're not doing right, that we miss every once in a while when they actually do what they're supposed to do, right? We don't even notice that we don't show our kids that we notice it. What we give our attention to has a huge power. It shapes our kids' behaviors. It's what, the saying, what you focus on, you get more of, right? And so if we catch our kids doing or acting in a way that aligns with our values, right? They're being loving, they're being kind, they were generous at some point. Let's point that out, let's celebrate that. Let's help them see that they made a wise choice. And let's focus on the values that we want to be able to teach them. So again, if it's values aligned with peace and patience and kindness and self-control, then these are the words that need to be coming out of our mouths, right? Like, let's say, hey, use kind words instead of saying, stop talking like that.
Right. Yeah, right. Oftentimes, we've done several different parenting, discussions here on the show. And one of the things I love to tell people is that, one of the things that we've tried to practice in our home, and we definitely don't always get this right, but we kind of share with our children, we don't tend to focus on what they've done, but we focus on who they're called to become, and really kind of highlighting how Christ sees them, as opposed to honing in and focusing on the mistakes that they make. And we have found it to be so much more beneficial to them when they see themselves in relationship to how Christ sees them, as opposed to we're constantly reminding them of a mistake that they've made, or or just kind of attacking the problem as opposed to who they're called to be.
I love that.
Let me, obviously we talk about our children, making mistakes and how do we discipline in that, in that piece. But I also would love to kind of talk about how do we handle, us as parents when we make mistakes. How do we make sure that how do we help ourselves to regain that peace? Yeah,
well, hey, the reality is we're not perfect. Like I said before, I know in the intro, Father Nicholas, you said, quote unquote, I'm like an expert. I am not an expert when it comes to parenting. I'm still learning how to parent with each of my kids as we go through different seasons in their lives. Right. And so recognize that we're not perfect. Perfection is not the goal here.
Right.
We're human beings and we make mistakes. And so then it becomes, what do I do with that? What do I do with these mistakes? How do I respond when I've said something in anger to one of my kids? Right. And so then I could see that as, an opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to again, model what it looks like to apologize, what it looks like to seek forgiveness, what it looks like to repent when we make mistakes. It's one of the reminders whenever I work with parents is, hey, there are no perfect parents and there are no perfect kids. So let's just kind of accept that. And then we're able to address, okay, mistakes will happen. Now what? Right. And the now what is, okay, we reset, we refocus, and we ask God for help. We ask God for forgiveness. We ask our kids to forgive us. And then we ask ask God for that guidance and the wisdom on how to handle things better, and learn from our mistakes. I mean, there's no sense in living in our imperfections and in our mistakes and feeling like, okay, we're stuck, because, hey, there's parenting is about growing. It's actually, like I said, parenting is very humbling. And part of that is it is a mirror of the areas that we need to grow. Like, hey, if I need to be more patient, parenting is going to show me that. Right. And it's going to provide the opportunity for me to practice that.
Mm-hmm.
And just in the last few minutes of our show, I'd love to just sort of get your nuggets of wisdom here on how we really empower children to make wise choices. I know we've talked a lot about how to respond to poor choices, but how do we empower our children to actually make wise choices?
Yeah, so that goes back to this, going back to our ability to reflect. And so helping our kids cultivate that ability, right? To be able to reflect and to be able to, again, take more of that curious stance and see like, okay, I do have a choice, like actually helping them realize that they do have choices. And part of actually going back to even starting from a younger age, we want to be able to give our kids opportunities to make choices, right? And so when they're younger, it starts with the simple things like, hey, do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt, right? But it gives them an opportunity to practice that muscle of making a choice, making a decision. And then as they get older, we're able to help them reflect on their behaviors, what it is that's happening inside of them that made, that led them to make a choice. And when they do make a mistake, right, involving them in the discipline process. So, we talked about problem solving. And so problem solving is part of that discipline process. Like, hey, okay, well, now this happened. What do you think we need to work on? What are some things that you can do so that you don't keep forgetting your homework, right? That you don't keep, getting angry at your brother or your sister when they do this. And so what are some ways, and help them in a safe kind of context and in the safety of the relationship between you and them, reflect and problem solve and brainstorm and learn from that process. And so, but the underlying piece of that, the kids aren't going to be able to do this if we don't have a strong relationship with them. So the first step is making sure that we are investing in our relationship with them so that we can foster that process. And actually, I mean, the brain research shows the more connection there is between parents and their kids, the more connection there is in their brain. Right? And so true. And so that's part of their ability to make wise choices is, so it actually has a relationship between how we're relating with them, how close do they feel to us, how loved do they feel, and that helps them develop those muscles to be able to choose better.
That's extraordinary. That's amazing how God has created us.
Isn't it? Yeah.
It's amazing. I'm always amazed by those facts.
Dr. Sofie, we are so just blessed and honored that, I'm looking at on YouTube and there's just one after another, just gratitude for this show tonight. And I'm just so grateful that you've taken the time to be with us this evening. And I definitely would want to invite you for future shows to be here on Live with the Louhs. I know the information that you shared with our listeners tonight is so invaluable. And so thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Love to be back.
Absolutely.
Wonderful having this. Thank you.
I'd love to have you.
And please give our love to Father Samuel as well, and just thank him as well for your time. And, in our last few moments of our show, I do want to take this opportunity to thank the producer of our show, Matushka Trudy, who many of you know. She produces every one of the shows here on Ancient Faith and does just an extraordinary job. And I just want to thank her for all that she does, and just an amazing, amazing woman of faith. I also want to just remind you all, if you're looking for a Christmas gift or looking for a last-minute thing to put in that stocking, definitely check out our book, Renewing You, A Priest, a Psychologist, and a Plan. It came out a couple of years ago. All the proceeds of this money go towards outreach ministries, and specifically the American Cancer Society. So you can find our book going to the store.ancientfaith.com/renewing you, or just simply putting Renewing You on the Ancient Faith website. You'll find all about the book. It's we hope it would be very beneficial to all of you. And if you're looking for those daily words of encouragement from us, definitely go to our website at thelouhs.com /subscribe, and share this show. I know that many parents will benefit greatly from this show. So we will have this show archived on our Louhs YouTube channel. So just definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Louhs and encourage your friends to do so as well. Everyone, on behalf of just Roxanne and myself, I just want to wish you all a Merry, Merry Christmas. And we will be taking next week off to honor the season of Christmas, but we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a brand new show from Live with the Louhs. So God bless you all, everyone, and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.